your hope, and your spirit. You survived people who smiled in your face while secretly hoping for your downfall. You survived conversations that happened behind closed doors. You survived being misunderstood by people who never took the time to understand you. You survived being judged for things you never did. You survived being abandoned by people you would have never abandoned. Yet here you are, not perfect, not untouched, not unchanged, but still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. That alone is evidence that God has been fighting battles for you that you never even knew existed. There is something powerful about being protected by God when nobody else understands what is happening. Human beings often look at results. God looks at reality. People saw your delays and assumed failure. God saw preparation. People saw your silence and assumed weakness. God saw wisdom. People saw your tears and assumed defeat. God saw strength being developed in secret. People saw closed doors and assumed rejection. God saw dangerous paths being blocked. What looked like loss was often protection. What looked like punishment was often preservation. What looked like abandonment was often redirection. The very moments that made you question everything were often the moments when God was guarding you from things that would have destroyed your future. Some of you know exactly what it feels like to be falsely accused. You know what it feels like to have your character questioned. You know what it feels like when someone tells a story about you that is not true, and suddenly people begin treating you differently. It hurts because truth matters. It hurts because your heart knows what actually happened. It hurts because you wish people would take the time to listen before making judgments. But listen carefully. God does not need public opinion to accomplish His purpose. God is not dependent upon human approval. The people who misunderstood you never had the authority to define your destiny. The people who doubted you never possessed the power to cancel what God planned for your life. Their opinions were loud, but God's decision was louder. Their criticism was temporary, but God's purpose remains. There were moments when you wanted to defend yourself. Moments when you wanted to explain everything. Moments when you wanted everyone to finally know your side of the story. Yet sometimes God allows silence because He knows something you do not know. He knows that truth has a way of surviving storms. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth stands on its own foundation. The people who built their judgments on assumptions will eventually confront reality. The people who celebrated your struggles will eventually see your survival. The people who counted you out will eventually witness what God can do with a life that refuses to surrender. Do you remember how alone you felt? Not physically alone, emotionally alone, spiritually alone. Surrounded by people yet carrying burdens nobody could see. You smiled when necessary. You answered questions when necessary. You fulfilled responsibilities when necessary. But deep inside, you were fighting battles that words could not describe. Some wounds cannot be explained. Some disappointments are too deep for ordinary conversations. You learned what it feels like to carry pain quietly. You learned what it feels like to wake up exhausted before the day even begins. You learned what it feels like to wonder how much more your heart could handle. Yet even in those moments, God never left. Think about that for a moment. The Creator of everything saw you in your weakest hour and chose not to abandon you. When your confidence disappeared, God remained. When your plans collapsed, God remained. When people walked away, God remained. When answers did not come, God remained. When opportunities vanished, God remained. Human loyalty can be fragile. Human promises can be broken. Human support can disappear overnight. But God remains constant through every season. That is why your story is not defined by who left. Your story is defined by who stayed. And God stayed. Many people believe victory begins when circumstances improve. That is not always true. Sometimes victory begins the moment you refuse to quit. Sometimes victory begins when you decide that disappointment will not control your future. Sometimes victory begins when you choose faith while carrying unanswered questions. Sometimes victory begins when your heart says, I do not understand what is happening, but I will trust God anyway. That kind of faith terrifies fear. That kind of faith confuses doubt. That kind of faith creates strength where weakness once lived. And that kind of faith is being developed inside you right now. There is a reason your enemies could not destroy you. There is a reason your setbacks did not finish you. There is a reason your darkest season did not become your final season. The reason is simple. God was not finished writing your story. People thought they were witnessing your ending when they were actually witnessing your preparation. They thought they were watching your collapse when they were actually watching your transformation. They thought your silence meant surrender when it actually meant God was working in places they could not see. Sometimes God allows a person to walk through a valley not because He has forgotten them, but because He is teaching them what mountains cannot teach. Valleys reveal character. Valleys reveal priorities. Valleys reveal hidden strength. Valleys strip away illusions. Valleys expose false foundations. Valleys teach dependence upon God in ways comfort never could. The valley you hated may become the testimony that saved someone else. The pain you wanted removed may become the wisdom that guides another person through their darkness. Nothing is wasted in God's hands. You have probably asked questions that seem to echo into silence. Why did this happen? Why did they betray me? Why did the opportunity disappear? Why did the relationship end? Why did the struggle last so long? Those questions are real. Those questions are human. But there comes a moment when faith asks a different question. Instead of asking, why did this happen? Faith begins asking, what is God building through this experience? What strength is being formed? What wisdom is being developed? What protection is being provided? What future is being prepared? Sometimes the answer is not found in looking backward. Sometimes the answer is discovered by continuing forward. There is something extraordinary happening when God smiles upon a life that refuses to give up. It does not mean every problem instantly disappears. It does not mean every critic suddenly becomes supportive. It does not mean every wound immediately heals. It means favor begins moving where fear once lived. It means peace begins growing where anxiety once ruled. It means confidence begins returning where doubt once dominated. It means hope begins rising where despair once settled. God's smile is not merely an emotion, it is a declaration. It is heaven's announcement that your struggle does not have the final word. Some people thought your mistakes would define you forever. They underestimated God's mercy. Some people thought your failures would become permanent labels. They underestimated God's power. Some people thought your losses would destroy your future. They underestimated God's ability to restore. Human beings often focus on what has been broken. God specializes in what can be rebuilt. Human beings focus on limitations. God focuses on possibilities. Human beings remember your worst moments. God sees your full potential and now something remarkable is happening. The same person who once cried in private is learning how to stand with confidence. The same person who once questioned their value is beginning to understand their worth. The same person who once felt invisible is realizing that God never overlooked them. The same person who once felt defeated is discovering hidden strength. The same person who survived betrayal is developing wisdom. The same person who survived rejection is developing resilience. The same person who survived isolation is developing unshakable faith. You are not who you were when this journey began. Pain changed you. Waiting changed you. Disappointment changed you. Prayer changed you. Growth changed you. The battles changed you. But not in the way your enemies expected. They expected bitterness. God produced wisdom. They expected surrender. God produced endurance. They expected despair. God produced faith. They expected weakness. God produced strength. What was intended to diminish you became part of the process that prepared you. Listen carefully. The fact that you survived is not ordinary. The fact that you are still hoping is not ordinary. The fact that you still believe God has a purpose for your life is not ordinary. Many people would have quit. Many people would have become consumed by anger. Many people would have allowed disappointment to harden their hearts. Yet something inside you kept moving. Something inside you kept believing. Something inside you kept praying. That something was not accidental. God was sustaining you through every step. Today, I want you to stop measuring your life only by what has not happened yet. Stop overlooking the miracles that already exist. You survived what you once thought would destroy you. You made it through nights you never thought would end. You carried burdens you never thought you could carry. You endured seasons you never thought you could survive. That is not failure. That is evidence. Evidence of God's guidance. Evidence of God's faithfulness. Evidence that your story is still unfolding. And perhaps the most beautiful truth of all is this. God did not smile upon you because you were perfect. God did not smile upon you because you never struggled. God did not smile upon you because you never doubted. God smiled upon you because through every battle, every disappointment, every betrayal, every lonely night, every unanswered question, you kept turning your heart toward Him. You kept searching for Him when life made no sense. You kept reaching for Him when strength was running low. You kept trusting Him when evidence was scarce. You kept believing when circumstances argued against belief. But wait a moment before you rush past those words. God smiled. And you won. Do you understand how powerful that really is? Because there was a time when it looked exactly the opposite. There was a time when nothing about your circumstances suggested victory. There was a time when loss seemed louder than hope. There was a time when disappointment seemed more believable than breakthrough. There was a time when the people around you looked at your situation and quietly decided that your best days were behind you. They did not say it openly. They did not always announce it with words, but you could feel it in the way they treated you. You could feel it in the way they stopped believing in you. You could feel it in the way they became comfortable watching you struggle. What they failed to understand is that God often works where human eyes cannot see. While people were studying your weaknesses, God was strengthening your foundation. While people were focusing on your losses, God was arranging your future. While people were talking about what you lacked, God was preparing what you needed. Heaven was moving while earth was misunderstanding. Divine purpose was advancing while human judgment was making incorrect conclusions. Some of you spent years trying to prove yourself to people who had already decided not to understand you. Think about how exhausting that is. No matter what you did, it was not enough. No matter how sincere you were, someone questioned your motives. No matter how hard you worked, someone ignored your effort. No matter how much you sacrificed, someone overlooked your contribution. Eventually, you reached a point where your soul became tired. Not tired from work, tired from carrying expectations that were never yours to carry. And that is where one of God's greatest lessons begins. There comes a moment when God teaches you to stop living for human validation. Why? Because human approval is unstable. One day people celebrate you, the next day they criticize you, one day they support you, the next day they abandon you, one day they praise your success, the next day they become uncomfortable with your growth. If your identity depends upon their approval, your peace will constantly be under attack. God wants something stronger for you. God wants you to discover the freedom that comes from knowing who you are in His sight. Imagine the strength that enters a person's life when they no longer need every critic to understand them. Imagine the peace that arrives when they stop chasing approval from people who cannot see what God sees. Imagine the confidence that develops when they realize that their value comes from their Creator, not from public opinion. The enemy of your peace was never simply the betrayal. It was the temptation to believe the betrayal defined your worth. The enemy was never simply the rejection. It was the temptation to believe rejection revealed your value. The enemy was never simply the setback. It was the temptation to believe the setback determined your future. But none of those things have the authority to define you. They happen to you. They are not you. Some of you have been carrying invisible scars for years. You learned how to function while hurting. You learned how to smile while grieving. You learned how to keep moving while feeling broken inside. People saw your survival, but never saw your struggle. People saw your strength, but never saw the nights when you felt weak. People saw your endurance, but never saw the moments when you almost gave up. God saw everything. God saw the tears you hid from everyone else. God saw the prayers that never left your lips because the pain was too deep for words. God saw the disappointment you buried beneath responsibility. God saw the loneliness that followed you into crowded rooms. God saw the silent battles nobody else recognized. And here is what should encourage you today. If God saw every tear, then none of them were wasted. If God saw every struggle, then none of it was meaningless. If God saw every sacrifice, then none of it was forgotten. Heaven keeps records that earth ignores. You may have felt forgotten by people, but you were never forgotten by God. There is a dangerous lie that often attacks people during difficult seasons. The lie says, nothing is happening. The lie says your prayers are accomplishing nothing. The lie says, God has moved on from you. The lie says, this struggle will never end. But look at your life honestly. Even during your hardest season, growth was happening. You became wiser. You became more discerning. You became stronger. You became less dependent on people's opinions. You became more aware of God's presence. You learned lessons that comfort could never teach. You developed resilience that convenience could never create. You discovered depths of faith that easy circumstances would never require. Growth was happening even when progress was invisible. That is one of the mysteries of God's work. Sometimes the most important changes occur beneath the surface. A tree does not become strong because of what is visible above ground. Its strength depends upon what develops underneath. In the same way, God often develops roots before He reveals fruit. He builds character before He reveals promotion. He develops wisdom before He reveals opportunity. He prepares the person before unveiling the purpose. Many people want immediate elevation. God wants lasting transformation. That is why some delays are not punishments. They are preparation. Some closed doors are not rejection. They are protection. Some seasons of waiting are not evidence of abandonment. They are evidence that God is working on details you cannot yet see. You have survived enough to know this is true. When you look back over your life, how many situations seemed devastating at the time, but later revealed hidden blessings? How many disappointments protected you from greater pain? How many unanswered prayers eventually made sense? How many delays saved you from making costly mistakes? At the time, you could not see it. At the time, you only saw the loss. At the time, you only felt the pain. But later, perspective arrived, and perspective revealed God's wisdom. The same God who guided you through those seasons is guiding you now. Do not underestimate what God can do with a surrendered heart. People often focus on resources, connections, influence, and opportunities. God often starts with willingness. A willing heart can survive storms. A willing heart can endure waiting. A willing heart can continue believing after disappointment. A willing heart can keep trusting after betrayal. And that is exactly why your story is not over. The people who counted you out were making judgments based on a chapter. God was writing the entire book. The people who assumed you were finished were looking at a moment. God was looking at a lifetime. The people who celebrated your struggles were focusing on temporary circumstances. God was focused on eternal purpose. Do you realize how many times God protected you from dangers you never noticed? How many conversations happened without your knowledge? How many traps failed because God intervened? How many wrong turns were prevented? How many disasters never reached you? One day you may discover that some of your greatest blessings were not the things God gave you. They were the things God prevented, the opportunities He blocked, the relationships He removed, the doors He closed, the paths He redirected, the plans He interrupted. At the time, those moments felt painful. Later, they revealed God's mercy. That is why your confidence cannot depend upon visible evidence alone. Sometimes God's greatest activity occurs behind the scenes. Sometimes His strongest protection is invisible. Sometimes His most powerful answers arrive disguised as delays. Do not confuse silence with absence. Do not confuse waiting with abandonment. Do not confuse difficulty with defeat. God has not brought you this far to leave you here. The fact that you are still standing is already proof that His hand has been upon your life. The fact that your heart still seeks Him is proof that hope remains alive. The fact that you continue moving forward despite everything that happened is proof that strength greater than your own has been carrying you. And now a new season is approaching. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect. Not because every problem disappears overnight. A new season is approaching because you are no longer the person who entered the last storm. You have changed. Your vision has changed. Your faith has changed. Your understanding has changed. Your priorities have changed. Your dependence upon God has deepened. And when God transforms a person internally, external changes eventually follow. So do not lower your expectations because of past disappointments. Do not surrender your hope because of previous delays. Do not allow old wounds to convince you that future blessings are impossible. The same God who sustained you in the valley can elevate you on the mountain. The same sword who carried you through heartbreak can lead you into restoration. The same God who protected you through confusion can guide you into clarity. The same God who smiled upon you when nobody else believed in you is still smiling upon you now. And when God decides that your season of surviving becomes a season of rising, no critic can stop it, no betrayal can prevent it, no lie can cancel it, and no obstacle can stand against it. Because when God smiles upon a life, what was meant to break, that life becomes part of the story of how it overcame. There is another truth you need to hear, especially if your heart has been carrying exhaustion for a long time. Not physical exhaustion alone, but the kind that settles deep within the soul, the kind that comes from fighting battles nobody applauds, the kind that comes from being strong for everyone while secretly feeling empty yourself, the kind that comes from constantly rebuilding after disappointment. If that is where you are today, listen carefully. God never asked you to carry the weight of the entire world. Somewhere along the journey, many people placed expectations on your shoulders that were never yours to bear. They expected you to heal every wound, solve every problem, rescue every relationship, and survive every attack without ever showing weakness. But God understands what people often forget. He understands that even the strongest hearts become weary. He understands that even faithful people have moments when they need strength. He understands that even courageous people sometimes feel afraid. The beautiful thing about God is that He does not wait for you to become invincible before He helps you. He meets you exactly where you are. He meets you in uncertainty. He meets you in weakness. He meets you in confusion. He meets you in moments when your faith feels small. Some people think they must arrive before God as perfect versions of themselves. But God has always worked through imperfect people. He has always strengthened people who knew what it felt like to struggle. He has always restored people who felt broken. He has always lifted people who thought they had reached their limit. Maybe that is why your story is so powerful. Not because you never fell. Not because you never doubted. Not because you never cried. Your story is powerful because every time life knocked you down, something inside you kept reaching toward God. Every setback became another opportunity to trust Him. Every disappointment became another invitation to depend upon Him. Every closed door became another reminder that your future does not depend upon human decisions alone. There were seasons when people underestimated your silence. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought silence meant defeat. But they misunderstood what was happening. Sometimes God teaches His strongest lessons in quiet places. While others were making noise, you were learning wisdom. While others were chasing attention, you were developing character. While others were obsessed with appearances, God was transforming your heart. That transformation matters more than many people realize. A person can gain success and still be empty. A person can gain recognition and still be restless. A person can gain influence and still feel lost. But when God transforms the heart, something deeper happens. Peace begins replacing anxiety. Purpose begins replacing confusion. Strength begins replacing fear. Hope begins replacing despair. Those changes cannot always be measured by human standards, but they change everything. One of the greatest victories God gives a person is freedom from bitterness. Think about everything you have experienced. Think about every betrayal. Think about every lie. Think about every disappointment. Think about every moment when people treated you unfairly. You had every opportunity to become bitter. You had every opportunity to become hardened. You had every opportunity to spend your life trapped in resentment. Yet here you are, still believing, still hoping, still growing, still seeking God. That alone is evidence of a miracle. Bitterness would have been easier. Resentment would have been easier. Revenge would have been easier. But God was building something greater inside you. He was teaching you that your future is too valuable to be chained to past wounds. The people who hurt you may never fully understand the damage they caused. Some may never apologize. Some may never acknowledge their actions. Some may never recognize the pain they created. That reality can be difficult to accept. But healing begins when you realize that your freedom does not depend upon their understanding. Your healing does not depend upon their apology. Your future does not depend upon their approval. Your future depends upon God. And that changes everything. Because God is not limited by what people fail to do. He is not limited by what they took from you. He is not limited by what they said about you. He is not limited by opportunities that disappeared. He is not limited by mistakes that were made. He is not limited by years that seem wasted. Human beings see limits. God sees possibilities. Human beings see damage. God sees restoration. Human beings see endings. God sees beginnings. That is why some of your greatest victories are still ahead of you. Not because you deserve them more than anyone else. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. But because God specializes in bringing life into places that appear hopeless. There is something remarkable about a person who continues trusting God after disappointment. That kind of faith is different. It is not shallow faith. It is not comfortable faith. It is not faith that exists only when circumstances are favorable. It is tested faith, refined faith, mature faith. It is faith that has survived storms and remained standing. Anyone can believe when everything is working perfectly. Anyone can feel confident when every door is open. Anyone can remain hopeful when every prayer appears to be answered immediately. But what about the person who keeps trusting when answers are delayed? What about the person who keeps believing when circumstances make no sense? What about the person who continues praying while carrying unanswered questions? That kind of faith moves the heart of God because it proves that your trust is deeper than your circumstances. Many people are waiting for visible evidence before they believe God is working. But faith often works in the opposite direction. Faith trusts before evidence appears. Faith continues moving while answers remain hidden. Faith chooses hope while uncertainty still exists. That is exactly what you have been doing. You may not have realized it. You may have felt weak. You may have felt overwhelmed. You may have felt discouraged. But every time you refused to quit, faith was operating. Every time you chose prayer over despair, faith was operating. Every time you trusted God despite confusion, faith was operating. Every time you got up after disappointment, faith was operating, and God noticed every single moment. Never underestimate what God notices. People notice achievements. God notices perseverance. People notice appearances. God notices sincerity. People notice public victories. God notices private battles. People notice outcomes. God notices obedience. That means the moments nobody applauded were still seen by heaven. The tears nobody understood were still seen by heaven. The sacrifices nobody appreciated were still seen by heaven. The courage nobody recognized was still seen by heaven. Nothing escaped God's attention. Nothing, not one prayer, not one struggle, not one act of faith, not one moment of endurance. God saw it all, and because He saw it all, He understands your story better than anyone else ever could. That is why you do not need to fear the future. You may not know every detail. You may not know every step. You may not know exactly how things will unfold, but you know the one who is guiding you. And that knowledge is more valuable than certainty about circumstances. Life becomes different when your confidence shifts from outcomes to God Himself, because outcomes change. Circumstances change. People change. Opportunities change. But God remains the same. The God who protected you yesterday is still protecting you today. The God who sustained you through previous storms is still sustaining you now. The God who carried you through heartbreak is still carrying you forward. The God who smiled upon you during your darkest season has not withdrawn His favor. His goodness has not expired. His wisdom has not weakened. His power has not diminished. His purpose has not failed. And neither has your story. In fact, some of the people who doubted you are about to witness something they never expected. Not because you are seeking revenge, not because you are trying to prove them wrong, but because God has a habit of lifting people after seasons of hidden preparation. The world often celebrates instant success. God often develops lasting strength. The world rewards appearance. God develops substance. The world focuses on visibility. God focuses on transformation. And transformation always creates stronger results than temporary attention. So stop viewing your journey through the lens of comparison. Stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. Stop questioning your value because another person's path looks different. God is writing a story that belongs to you. A story shaped by experiences that are uniquely yours. A story filled with lessons that are uniquely yours. A story carrying purpose that is uniquely yours. No one else can walk that path exactly as you can. No one else can fulfill that purpose exactly as you can. And no one else has been carried through your battles exactly as you have. That is why today is not a day to focus on what you lost. It is a day to remember what survived. Your faith survived. Your hope survived. Your purpose survived. Your calling survived. Your heart survived. And most importantly, your connection with God survived. Everything that tried to destroy it failed. Everything that tried to silence it failed. Everything that tried to extinguish it failed. You are still here, still believing, still standing, still moving forward. And the reason is simple. God smiled upon your life when darkness expected defeat. God smiled upon your life when people expected collapse. God smiled upon your life when circumstances predicted failure. And because God smiled, what should have ended you became the very thing that revealed how powerfully He was working within you. So as you stand at this moment, looking back at every battle, every tear, every betrayal, every lonely night, and every season that seemed impossible to survive, do not make the mistake of thinking you arrived here by accident. You are not standing here because you were the strongest person in the room. You are not standing here because you always had the answers. You are not standing here because life treated you fairly. You are standing here because God carried you when your strength was gone. God protected you when danger was hidden. God guided you when the path was unclear. God comforted you when nobody understood your pain. Every breath you took through the storm was evidence that His hand was still upon you. There were people who thought your story would end in disappointment. There were people who expected your faith to collapse under pressure. There were people who believed the weight of your struggles would eventually break you. But they underestimated what happens when God decides to sustain a person. They underestimated the power of divine mercy. They underestimated the strength that God can place inside a wounded heart. They underestimated the purpose that God was building through your pain. What looked like your breaking point became your turning point. What looked like an ending became preparation for a new beginning. And now, as you move forward, carry this truth deep within your soul. You do not have to live in fear of what is ahead. The same God who brought you through yesterday is already present in tomorrow. The same God who protected you in the valley will remain with you on the mountain. The same God who stood beside you in seasons of rejection will stand beside you in seasons of favor. Your future is not being held together by luck, by human approval, or by perfect circumstances. Your future is resting in the hands of God, and there is no safer place for it to be. So release the bitterness, release the regret, release the need to prove yourself to people who never understood your worth. Release the weight of old wounds that have stolen enough of your peace. Let God heal what people damaged. Let God restore what life tried to take. Let God renew the strength that endless battles drained from your spirit. You were never created to spend your life staring at closed doors. You were created to keep walking with faith, knowing that when one path ends, God is already preparing another. Do not shrink because of what happened to you. Do not lower your expectations because of past disappointments. Do not allow old failures to speak louder than God's promises. Lift your eyes higher. Your story is bigger than your pain. Your purpose is bigger than your setbacks. Your future is bigger than your fears. The chapters filled with heartbreak are not the final chapters. The pages covered in tears are not the final pages. God is still writing. One day, you will look back and realize that the season you thought would destroy you was actually the season that revealed God's faithfulness more clearly than ever before. You will see how every delay carried wisdom. You will see how every closed door carried protection. You will see how every hardship carried a lesson. You will see how every tear watered the ground for future growth. And when that day comes, you will understand that God never abandoned you for a single moment. God smiled and you won.